Senator Steve Glazer is our guest. Our format today, thanks to our sponsorship by Marathon, is that this is a free event open to all East Bay Leadership Council members. And we have a group that's gathering, but we want to value people's time today. So the format today is Senator Glazer is going to give about 10 minutes of prepared remarks. Then we're going to shift into our moderated Q&A. We've got some questions that were submitted in advance by those in attendance, and we'll work those into the conversation. But what I want you to do is use the chat function. For the purposes of having a high quality event, all of our participants are muted, and you do not have the ability to unmute yourself, which may be frustrating, but just know that we're excited to get you into the conversation, but your vehicle to do that is through the chat. So I'm going to dispense with introducing any elected officials in the audience today, but feel free to get us started in the chat. If you are an elected official and you want to let Senator Glazer know that you're here and let everyone know that you're here, please, you can go ahead and put that in the chat right now. And so, as always, we're grateful for the engagement of our elected officials from all across our region, which largely covers Senator Glazer's senatorial district. So without further ado, with again a thanks to Marathon, our sponsor of the Capital Series in 2021, I'm going to go ahead and do a very brief introduction of Senator Glazer. And because I know that he would probably not want me to read his full bio and want to get things started. So as you all know, Steve Glazer was elected to the California State Senate, the 7th District, in a special election in 2015. I remember fondly the East Bay Leadership Council candidate forum for that race. And he's won election twice since then, getting elected to a full term in 2016 and re-elected last fall. He's the chairman of the Elections and Constitutional Amendment Committee and serves on the Agriculture, Education, Government Organization, and Insurance Committees. He previously served on the City Council and is a three-time mayor of Orinda. And certainly is a lifelong environmental advocate. He's raised hundreds of millions of dollars to permanently protect open space in California and 25 other states. He's a former senior advisor to former California Governor Jerry Brown, and certainly played a key role in helping return California to solid financial footing following the Great Recession. He's also served as an appointed CSU trustee, working on limiting tuition increases and lowering administrative costs at the CSU. He's a proud graduate of San Diego State University, go Aztecs, where he was the former student body president. So I could go on and on and on about Steve accolades, but we'll turn it over to you, Senator Glazer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you very much. And everybody at the East Bay Leadership Council, thank you for inviting me to talk with you today. I've enjoyed a great working relationship with many of you throughout my Senate career and prior to that. My wonderful family sent me a text message today reminding me that today is the 6-year anniversary of my election to the Senate. 6 years, wow, it has gone by so fast. But it has been a great honor to represent you in the Senate, and something I never take for granted. And I consider every day special that I get to be in this job, trying my best. I know that we're going to talk about some issues that are on your mind, transportation, housing, and others, but I do want to acknowledge this extraordinary time in which we are living through. This COVID pandemic has been horrible. It's been horrible. I know each of you have faced difficult personal and professional challenges in this circumstance. It's amazing when you think about 61,000 Californians have lost their life. Almost 600,000, more than 600,000 in America. And it's been very difficult. One of the things that me and my staff worked hard on right at the start of the pandemic, 14, 15 months ago, is to make sure that we could provide as much current information about what was going on and why, whether it was about the food chain or about healthcare opportunities or problems for small businesses, issues with the Employment Development Department. We did over 21 town halls, virtual town halls, of course, to try to get the experts in the front lines communicating with you and sharing all the information that they have. And, we're coming through that very difficult period now. And obviously there's a lot of positive feelings as we see the restrictions being lifted, but and the high vaccination rates that we are getting here in our community, which is so very important for coming out of this healthier and better. I hope if have not vaccinated that you are taking care of that, and they're providing that opportunity for younger people too. And we just need to do that for the sake of our economy, businesses, our schools, and certainly for the broader public health. And I want to do a shout out to the public health community here in Contra Costa. They have done an incredible job. The county of Contra Costa, the whole medical staff, all the wonderful frontline workers in our healthcare community, the nurses, the doctors, the support staff, the hospitals. I can't believe how challenging it has been for them, more so than certainly many of us. And add to that the frontline workers, the essential workers, whether it's the folks in the fields harvesting our crops, or the people at the grocery stores, or the delivery drivers. We really have had a lot of heroes in our community this past year, and it's important to recognize them. So those are some things that are a little bit of an aside to the issues at hand, but I do appreciate this moment in time in which we're coming together via Zoom versus in person, where we can enjoy a nice meal together and some beverages. And it looks like that opportunity is going to be coming sooner than certainly sooner. And I look forward to that engagement, which is a lot more personal and positive. Well, it's been a rocky time in the legislative process too. And Kristin, you may have some follow-up questions in regard to that. But the legislature's remained in business, trying to weave our way through the health risks associated with it. And so we did begin this year with the ability to advance what we perceive to be important legislative activity to address a whole broad range of issues. I want to highlight just a couple. I know that my full legislative program is available on my website. I've asked my staff if they could post that in the chat. So you have a link to, I think 16, 18 bills that I'm advancing, but I'm just going to highlight a few, and there could be some follow-up questions to that. One of the things that's been made clear in this pandemic, and we knew before this pandemic, is the issue of mental health. We've been struggling as a society both to be comfortable talking about issues of mental health, as well as the actions that we have taken to help people that are struggling. And so I'm advancing a 3-bill package in that space. Let me mention them briefly. First is legislation to provide better oversight in all the spending that we're doing in the mental health area. In California, we're spending about $7 billion on behavioral health. It's a big number. And a lot of programs are going on in our community and around the state, but there is very little oversight to track the spending and the outcomes. So I have legislation to do that. Secondly, our system of mental health has the extremes. If you're in crises, we have a way of hopefully creating the support system and the help in that space. And then when you're on your own and you're able to cope and you've gotten better balance in your life, we have a system to help monitor that and track it. But there is this big gap in between when you go from one to the other, from crises to wellness, and then from wellness back to crises. And there's a gap that I'm trying to fill with legislation to provide a little better oversight in that space. And finally, when we talk about mental health, you have to talk about our kids, not just the challenges that they're enduring, not being in school and remote learning and all that. But when you take a closer look at the kind of resources that we provide for mental health in our schools, it's almost zero. It's almost non-existent. And I've been working with many in our mental health community to try to address that issue. And one of the suggestions that they made that I have embraced is to create a new mental health license plate. I'm going to show you a picture of it, of the example, the award-winning example from a San Ramon high school student. And so I have legislation to create a mental health license plate. And if we get 7,500 people to want to get one of these, all the resources will go to mental health in our schools. And I've asked it be put in the chat if you're interested in showing your interest in one of these license plates. If the legislature approves it and signed by the governor, please check out that link. And I hope you'll consider um, potentially getting one of these plates. We need to destigmatize mental health. We have to talk about it. It's like a broken arm. So let's not make it seem like bigger than it is. We all face stressful, challenging times in our lives, and we need a better safety net, better oversight, more accountability, but more resources as well. Appreciate that opportunity. We had a town hall on mental health just a couple weeks ago with experts to come in and share their thoughts and feedback about things that we're experiencing. And that link, I think I've asked to put it in the chat if you're interested in watching. It was a Zoom, that mental health town hall, and the resources that are available for people who are struggling. Check that out as well. I wanted to also address an issue that we're experiencing a lot in the East Bay, of course, across California. It's the area of climate change, and it's the area of the expanded fire season that we're facing. I mean, really, the pandemic has changed our lives, and it's like a light switch where we have to look at the world differently. And climate change for some is a light switch. For others, they have seen it coming. And we are seeing it in our communities in a lot of poignant ways. The expansion of fire, the fire season, and the fires that have broken out are historic in their level and their impact. We've also experienced these public safety power shutoffs for the last couple of years. They're incredibly disruptive for business, for people. It's not just about spoiling all the stuff that's in your refrigerator and your freezer. It's also about your ability to connect via our telecommunications network. If you've got an emergency that you need to call out or people need to reach you, there's a lot of breakdowns in that space. We've also needed to focus on forest management, that there are fuels in our hills and in our forests that we have not been managing. We've also had to look at the zoning for homes and residents in high fire severity areas. We've had to look at that. And finally, all of this has had an impact on the insurance marketplace. I don't know if you've had some trouble getting renewal of your homeowner's insurance, as an example, but it's an unstable marketplace. So within that whole frame of climate change and fires, I have advanced one piece of legislation to try to deal with that in a modest way, and that's to create a new forest management training center in Northern California, and to use that as a place for previously incarcerated to be trained and licensed in forest management. And I think it has a real positive, has the positive potential. We don't have enough folks working in this space, just like there was a story today about the lack of firefighters, that jump into fires. And we have a lot of personnel issues on the firefighting side and also on the forest management side. And this bill is an attempt to try to help with that. It's SB 804 if you're interested in looking it up and following it further. Also, let me just finally talk about the issue of education and higher education briefly. It's another area we know how important it is to our community, how important it is to our economy. And one of the things that's been very apparent is the facilities for our schools at every level, K through 12, community colleges, and higher ed. And so I have legislation to create a bond to $15 billion to put more investment in our school and our universities. And finally, I think for those who have come back to these conversations that we have had in the past at the Leadership Council, you've heard me talk about student success, the ability to get into college and then to get through in an efficient and effective way. The four-year graduation rate is 5 years ago when I first talked about this was 19% to get through in 4 years. Pleased that through the work we've done in the legislature and great leadership at the universities, that four-year graduation rate is now at 30%. And we're trying to get to 40% by 2025. And so I'm continuing to legislate in that space to try to create pathways for students, not just to get into college, but also to get through in an effective way. Okay, let me touch upon two of the issues that I know Kristin wanted me to talk about, and I'm sure there'll be questions about, and that's the issue of housing and transportation as I finish up. There's no doubt that all of us in the legislature recognize the serious problem we have in affordable housing in our community. Not just affordable housing, but enough housing out there. And so there is a lot of conversations ongoing about solutions. How do we incentivize the marketplace? How do we deal with the local land use and what that means. And there's a whole slew of bills that once again come before us. They came before us last year, and they've come before us again this year. And so we're taking a close look at them. A lot of them are going to be acted upon in the next couple of weeks. And it's clear to me that California needs creative and flexible solutions, that we need everyone to be at the table stretching to try to expand production and provide better affordability. I think that one of the frustrating things that I have experienced is that a lot of the finger pointing in this space has been on our local cities and our great local city leadership that's out there. And when I take a look at those concerns, city by city in Contra Costa County and Alameda County, certainly in my district, I see just the opposite. I see our elected officials stretching and educating their community and approving thousands of units of housing. You can't drive by Walnut Creek now and see the incredible progress that the leadership in Walnut Creek have been making. And you can't walk through the towns of Pittsburgh and Antioch and know the thousands of units that have been approved by their local governments but haven't been built, and they sit there. The same is in Concord, where they've approved units and they haven't been built. So I have been somewhat defensive in this space because I think I've seen our local governments really stretch and do many good things in this space, but you still have a marketplace and you have private investment that is going to be the driver for construction. And if they don't feel that the risks are worth the reward, then that housing is not getting done. And so it is a serious problem that we have still not found our way through. And so rather than point fingers, I know it means all of us need to be at the table, stretching, finding ways to incentivize production and the rest. And I look forward to feedback and further questions and comments on that in our conversation today. And finally, in the area of transportation, it is so important to our region. There's just no doubt about it. I was pleased to see that Governor Newsom last week proposed $11 billion in new investment in infrastructure. Some of it, much of it is in the area of transportation. We know we need to continue to invest in public transportation. I know that many of you know I've been a careful observer of BART, not because I like to pick on BART, but because I know how important it is to our community, and an efficient, effective BART system is just so massively important. Our highways are not wide enough to deal with the transportation needs that we have in our area. So with that, Kristin, I hope I didn't go too long, but I appreciate this opportunity to give kind of a broad overview of some of the things I'm working on. And I look forward to the continued conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, thank you so much, Senator. You definitely did not go into long. There are big problems to deal with, and I really appreciate that you started the conversation with mental health. And so I know Alex Evans from HNTB put in a link to Lenny Mendonca's some recent news about Lenny. He's sharing about destigmatizing mental health, and I just think that that's particularly important. So, but to pick up on what you just we're talking about related to housing, and I'll work through a bunch of other issues. So in terms of getting a seat at the table and bringing everybody together, I like your idea that it's sort of this all hands approach and that we all really need to stretch. I think that's very consistent with what we've been saying as an organization for a long time. What I've been saying as a resident of Lafayette in your district in terms of trying to push the council in various ways. But so what are the ideas that you like, if any, about stretching? You know, there are so many things, and, you know, the business community, and you hear this from my counterparts at other organizations a lot, been waiting for years for there to be a push about production. Because the truth is, we've been underproducing my entire life as a Californian, just about. Yeah. And so what are some of the ideas you like? So
let me mention some, and thank you for such a great question. Here's a factoid that's going to surprise a lot of folks. And by the way, this is a part about not being in person. I don't get to see Alex Evans, but I'm glad he's in the chat and he's connecting with us here. That's a hard part about Zoom. But here's an interesting factoid. There are 550,000 approved units, housing units in California today, right now. Mm-hmm. That's a complete two-year massive production of housing. that you can build today. Don't require any new approvals, no CEQA reviews, no court challenges. They're done. And they're not getting built. They're not getting built. And I think that's a very important question to ask about why is that? And I think part of the answer is because of the cost of building, right? Whether it's labor costs or material costs or land costs or the cost of getting approvals, all those things are now built in. And the private capital markets, the developers are saying, it's still too much of a risk. I feel like I'm not going to get a return, and to take the chance to build. And I think that there needs to be a lot of conversation around that point, but that's an interesting factoid. And then let me address more specifically one of the challenges that doesn't get addressed very often. And you know, we have an example right here in our community in Concord at the Naval Weapons Station. That was a 12,000 unit project, 12,000 units. They spent years, and there may be people on this Zoom, Kristin, I can't see everybody, but there may be electeds and others involved in that project that spent a lot of time trying to get that in the right place to have it be built. And it blew up. It blew up because of interest group conflicts. And in this case, whether the whole project was a union project or partially union project. And one of the challenges that we face is that on one hand, we want good paying jobs in everything that we do, public projects, private projects. But at the same time, that also can be a counterpoint to increasing costs depending on how it's done and what limitations are put on developers and who they use and all the rest. And so you have these two good values of good paying jobs and trying to keep costs down so construction actually happens and people can have an opportunity to move into a unit or buy a unit or whatever it is. And so we have right in our backyard an example where a clash of those values, those good values, ended up with no project.
Right.
12,000 units.
Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, it was
Correct.
Incredibly painful at the start of the pandemic.
And so I watched that from afar and it was like, oh my gosh, how could this have happened? And it's not out of the goodwill of the city leadership and the wonderful community leadership. And for those on all sides, except it broke down, and it broke down in a very significant way because that project is years now back on the drawing board. And it's to be seen whether developers will want to come in and want to bid on that project. You know, they're trying to figure that out right now. But that's an example of where our values, which are all good, turn into something that's turned out to be all bad. And that's being replicated. San Francisco has a project that they are advancing now in the affordable space, where they have used a different technique of construction, modular housing, but it's not built with trades on the site. And even though it was built with union labor, carpenter's labor, the position from the building trades is that we'll never, ever approve another project like that in San Francisco again. But why is it being constructed? Because it's an affordable project now, because of the construction materials and the style. So they stretched in San Francisco. God bless them for doing it. They're building an affordable project. And believe me, a lot of the criticism to our suburban cities is because of a failure to build affordable in our urban centers like San Francisco. So good for them. And they found an innovative way to do it. And then the forces that are around it say, well, we'll never let that happen ever again. And so that's an important thing. There's a Chronicle story on that for those who are interested in a little bit more of that background. So check it out. And it's interesting to see the story of that evolving, where the message from some is that we'll never, ever let that happen again.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you talked about the goodwill on that project. We stand at the ready. If you have ideas or want to hear our ideas about unsticking that project, you know, we'd love to collaborate. And some have proposed that the answer actually is a JPA to get it through the approvals and this and that. But, you know, I know there's a serious commitment in the city of Concord, and we want to, help them get that project back on track, because it really was that was one of my first, set of Zoom meetings, switching gears at the beginning in March of last year, and just to have that there's a lot of effort and a lot of time put in from a lot of folks on this call and from our organization. So I'm glad you brought it up. And if we can unstick it, we'd love to do that. I do want to talk a little bit specifically about I was glad that you raised the issue of having, your bills around more transparency and accountability for the behavioral health spending. And I think that that's needed across all levels of government. I know that our members are, interested in seeing how we can enhance oversight and make sure that there are, that we're getting more for every dollar, and actually not just looking at how much we spend, but what we get for it. And so wanted to ask about your reaction. You did mention the $11 billion in infrastructure, largely that's for transportation, that was in Governor Newsom's proposed May revise last week. But what other components? What did you think about the $12 billion for homelessness? I mean, it was an incredible week, particularly if you think about where we've come from as a state, to see, the size of this surplus. But, sort of, could you characterize what you like about his budget and maybe what you think maybe what you look at a little bit differently?
Well, thank you. I in the transportation space, I'm not happy about the $4 billion for high-speed rail, to be honest.
I had a bingo square about that, sir. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it was a great idea and concept. Who would not want to have that? I mean, but there's no financial plan that can show that project ever being completed. Mm-hmm. And so every dollar we're spending on it now, for me, is a dollar that could be spent in transportation improvements in our area. Mm-hmm. So it's not really a negative on high-speed rail. Philosophically, it's that just show me a financial plan that shows how it's going to get from the Bay Area to LA, and I don't see it. And it's going to be massively more expensive than people project. So when the governor is allowing $4 more billion to be spent there, I don't think that's a good thing. I agree with the point that you made about accountability, and I'll give you an example of that. We're investing a lot in BART. Mm-hmm. We created an inspector general to provide some oversight over BART, and she issued a report within the last few weeks about the lack of cooperation that BART is giving her in her oversight in the spending that's happening at BART. And so we've created these inspector generals in a lot of different places in our government. Mm-hmm. But if the bureaucracy, and in this case the BART board and BART management, are going to stymie that kind of healthy oversight, that's a big negative. And it's certainly high on my radar to try to talk about it and try to find ways to work through it. But we do need that accountability for the kind of spending that we're doing. When you look at the governor's budget, there's a lot of really great things in there. I applaud the governor for his vision and his many investments that he can make. We can spend all day talking about them. I'll tell you what worries me a little bit, though, is the lack of attention to our liabilities, the other side of the ledger. And we have hundreds of billions in liabilities that I would like to see us try to take some of this surplus and cover. And when you look at the cuts last year that were happening at the higher education level, and in various other places in state government, even though we had a $20 billion surplus, it wasn't enough. It right. wasn't enough to get us through that pandemic, which is obviously an excessive potential problem than an economic recession. But it points out to me again that our rainy day fund is inadequate, given the mm-hmm. size of California and the investments we make in people and places and education and the rest, that we need a better cushion to deal with these ups and downs of our economy. And I recognize, again, a pandemic is not a run-of-the-mill economic problem. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see a little bit more care in saving more of our money. Not to speak of these wonderful programs that the governor is advancing in his budget that we're going to now review over the next couple of weeks. But I have a little more fiscally conservative side to me, as some of you may know. Mm-hmm. And that means to look at the out years, to look at when times are not as good. And have we created the cushion so we don't have to cut in our schools like it was contemplated just last year. And so we can have more stability in the programs that we do run.
Mm-hmm. Well, and kind of sort of to just put a finer point on that, as an elected school board member, you know, we're not getting any extra relief on our CalPERS and CalSTRS obligations, you know, as part of, you know, even though there's all this surplus, and that could really make a big difference. But to your point about what our obligations are and how that all manifests itself. And so appreciate your kind of conservative approach on that.
I mean, the governor put in like $1 billion for retirement, but it's really a drop in the bucket. So he did touch it,
yeah.
but not to the level I think that we need to, because, you know, at the school board level, that those retirement costs have just been growing every year, and you're not getting more money to cover that. So it's eroding the programming that you're providing in your schools every year. And there's no way to close that gap unless we in government put a lot more resources into that space, or the stock market goes out of control. And I know we've had an improving stock market, but it doesn't show up on the revenue side of the retirement for 5 or 6 years down the road. It just won't, because of the smoothing actions that these agencies have taken.
Yeah. So, but to ask, to go back again to some of the specifically around the homelessness funding that's in the budget, is that, I mean, obviously there's been a huge investment with Project Home Key and Room Key, and what we learned in the pandemic around the public health danger of overcrowded housing, right? I mean, just today, the East Bay Times is talking about housing in Contra Costa, home prices up 39%. And so, you know, there's acutely felt, and then there's all this pressure around our existing unsheltered population and people that are at risk for homelessness. But, you know, and there was a big city mayor request for 30 billion and this proposal for 12 billion. And do you have any thoughts about the homelessness approach?
Well, thank you, Kristin. I mean, I think it was one of the successes in the pandemic that Governor Newsom led on right from the start in trying to depopulate these crowded conditions in our shelters, get people off the street, as he has been trying to do and we all want to do, and to try to find now some permanent solutions to the homeless issue. And look, I'm supportive of the resources going there. It is a very difficult problem because it's so multidimensional, and it does involve mental health, and it does involve drug abuse, family circumstances. There's a lot of elements to it in addition just to shelter and having an apartment or a home. So I'm hopeful that these resources will be put to good use, and that I certainly want to see the oversight to make sure the money is being spent right and that we're seeing some results from it. It's a lot of the frustrations that some people feel about our schools. We've been putting more and more and more money into our schools, and I know there's criticism that it's not enough, and that in the sense of where we are in America as a state, it might be in the mid-level, but it's not enough. But the other side of that is we're not seeing the results, and we got to focus still on the results. And so I hope that as we are directing more money to help the homeless, which who wouldn't want to do, that we have the oversight to see where we're getting the results and making sure that we are for the amount that we're spending.
Yeah, well, we're fortunate that in Contra Costa, LaVonna Martin is leading the charge and for our
She's
county.
my citizen of the year, my woman of the year. She's incredible.
I did want to give you a chance to so well done, sir, on that choice. And our own Lindy Lavender chairs the Council on Homelessness. So it's something we care about deeply, and we'll keep talking about.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you, Lindy.
So I did want to, so just taking a step back, because this is our first time sitting down and talking with you in the change of administration. And if you can remember the pre-COVID times, the way back times, we follow each other on Twitter. And we were a very early supporter of President Biden and knocked on doors in Iowa. And I just wanted to just take a moment and, we're talking about housing and transportation a lot, but what's your sense of how things have changed and how President Biden's doing? And what do you think about his infrastructure package? Happy 6th anniversary since your election. But I would just love to get a sense of what this has meant from your perspective, because you think a lot about governing. So I thought you'd have an interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, it's certainly been the issue of beyond the pandemic, the issue that's been on my mind the most is that I think one of the things that has become clear to me within the frame of our democracy is how fragile it is. Mm-hmm. It's just not like it's always been there, and it's rock solid. And I think the events of the last year have made it clear that this is not something to be ignored and not paid attention to. Confidence in government and confidence in our elected leaders at every level is really fundamental to the continuation of our democracy. And so when I looked at the presidential race, I certainly was yearning for stability. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, when I looked at the field of candidates out there, for me, it was, where can there be some stability and greater civility and graciousness, not because of one policy issue or another, but because of how important it is that we find a way to get along together and work together and communicate together. And so I was an early supporter of Vice President Biden. I went to Iowa and I walked precincts in Iowa for him. And I felt that he could be that stabilizing force, and was pleased that he was able to prevail against some wonderful, wonderful candidates on the Democratic side, not to speak ill of any of them, but I thought could provide the leadership that we need. And I've been very pleased with how he has started. Kristin, I think that he has done exactly what he said he would do, which is to try to be thoughtful and careful. He hasn't shied away from being bold. I think that if there's surprises out there, I think that he's been bold in infrastructure. He's been bold on the COVID response and helping cities and counties and states and schools try to recover from what we've experienced. So he's been bolder than I expected, but I'm very pleased with his leadership. And I hope that, again, no matter your politics, I hope that you can appreciate a level of stability that we may be feeling in an unstable time. And we have to keep working on that. You know, part of my responsibilities now is chair of the Senate Elections Committee. And some of the crazy challenges to our elections that, I mean, I call them crazy, but, you know, they're in some ways troubling and dangerous, because it's foundational to our ability to elect people with confidence that the rules have been followed and there's been a fair plane in which we've conducted our elections. And it was called into question, unfortunately. I see no evidence of it anywhere in any state to rise to the level of concern. And so, and we have in California have tried to liberalize our inclusive elections process. We send everybody a ballot. You know, our election turnout was higher than it's ever been in decades. And I think that's because we tried to make the elections easier for people to participate in. And I hope we continue with that. But it also has to have the oversight. We talk about oversight in a lot of places, including elections. And if there's any issues of fraud or concern about how they're conducted, we'll be right on it in a second, because nobody wants that, because that's part of the trust element that's so important to our democracy. And we have to work at it all the time at our elections level, and also in the decision making, how we go about making decisions in our city councils and our school boards and our legislature, that we have to be transparent and open and honest. And I think we all need to work hard at that.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And so, yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to get, you know, I was reflecting that in addition to being at a time when we've lost so many Californians and lost so many Americans, and the pandemic's been so hard. I'm also a very happy parent of a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old who got their first dose of vaccine almost immediately after it was approved on Wednesday, right? And
Yay.
And Walgreens is not yet a member of the East Bay Leadership Council, but I'm a big fan of Walgreens. That's where that happens.
They should be.
So, yeah, so there you go. I'll work on that. So I did want to kind of, you know, I did want to just call out the public health leadership across your district in both Contra Costa and Alameda have just done extraordinary job. And you saw there are some comments in the chat acknowledging that there are folks that appreciate that you acknowledge that loss. When do you think that the Capitol will reopen so that we can, you know, kind of engage as a public again? Is that part of the June 15th Beyond the Blueprint move? Or,
you know, as we are talking right now, we're having our first protest in a long time. There are folks driving around the Capitol, honking their horns. I think it has to do with solar energy. I'm not exactly sure, but the Capitol's still closed for public entry. We do provide limited access for our hearings in person, if that is the only avenue that someone has. And some of the barriers around the Capitol that came up after the insurgency in January are now coming down just this past week. So it seems like the security is starting to relax, hopefully
Mhm.
because of confidence that we're safer than we have been. And as we get in front of the pandemic, I think that the hope would be that perhaps at the June 15th so-called reopening that the governor has designated, that perhaps the Capitol building might be open again. But life is coming back. They're allowing our staffs to come back into the building in a limited way. So that's allowing us to get our work done a little bit better. Everybody's been working remotely. My whole staff's been working remotely for the past year, as many businesses have had to do, and that's not great. So um, it seems that things are getting back to a better spot, but of course, it's all based on the pandemic and what are the health and safety standards that we have to make sure we're abiding by. And another shout out to our public health officers, who really have been the courageous ones, seeing the risks associated with this virus and calling it out, certainly in the Bay Area, better than most.
Right.
And it's
No,
created a new normal because look, all this has been uncomfortable. And as we had our town hall on mental health, one of the questions that came up early, we asked one of the doctors was, a person had written in saying, I know I'm told it's safe to do this and to do that, but I just still feel very, very uncomfortable. And got the response about that's just a natural a barrier that our brains have been reprogrammed for risk, and we were looking at things differently. And as much as it was crazy to think we're going to walk around in masks 15 months ago, now it seems like I'm uncomfortable taking my mask off, even if the health community says it's safe in certain places. So we are having to go through a whole different reorientation of our brains, and our a sense of risk has changed a lot. But this is a part of now moving through this, transitioning through this very difficult, dark period, and just acknowledge how it's not easy for anyone. And if you're struggling with that, it's okay. We all are, and but that's why you have to talk about it with your friends and family, and take baby steps, and you'll see that you'll get reoriented again to a safe space that maybe your lives will get back more quickly to something that is closer to normal.
Well, I did want to, so I'm going to want to incorporate the questions that we got in advance from folks, as well as what's in the chat. And I'm actually going to go from the newest thing in the chat from Lara Delaney, who wears multiple hats as an elected official in the city of Martinez and also working for Contra Costa County, that acknowledges that, so, her question to you is that the governor's budget fails to acknowledge really ignores the need to rebuild local public health departments and to support their strategies for addressing social determinants of health, right? Those factors that led communities of color to be so vulnerable to sickness and death from COVID-19. So, just wanted to put a plug in there. And so, the connectedness between the local public health threat, natural disasters, communicable diseases, health impacts of climate change are all things there. And so she points to an organization supporting, there's 100 organizations supporting a $200 million appropriation for that.
Yeah, they had a press conference today. I saw that, and I'm supportive of those augmentations. I mean, one of the things that became clear is our underinvestment in public health in this pandemic, for sure. Certainly, the inequities that the pandemic exposed, at an even greater level, and we have to learn from those things. I hope that we do. I have a bill on data. One of the challenges that I saw in this pandemic is the lack of transparency on data on where people were getting sick, so that we could tailor our responses in a more focused way. I think that's why some of these inequities happen, because we didn't focus on crowded living conditions as an example.
Right.
We didn't focus in on essential workers as an example. And I think that we've struggled to try to do that right. And I will say this, and again, a shout out to our public health in Contra Costa, that the inequity index, so it was an assessment of the spread of the virus for everybody, and then there's a spread within communities of color, and we call it an inequity differential. It's very small now because of the great work that they've done in Contra Costa to get vaccines out to communities throughout the county, so that the difference is very small now, and that's progress. So good news for that. We still need a lot more people vaccinated, but the county's done a great job and eliminating that inequality that we've seen in other places during the pandemic. So I agree with that investment. Laura, thank you. I agree with that, the need for that investment, and we'll see what happens during our budget process in the next couple of weeks.
Sort of building on that, in terms of thinking about what we have learned in the pandemic, I know that we have, as an organization, both the East Bay Leadership Council and our sister organization, the Contra Costa Economic Partnership, we have really looked at equity in a new way and we've implemented a racial justice policy, so we have a frame for how we look at taking our policy positions. And we're with the support of the county, we're leading the Contra Costa's Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force to try to build and really focus on, if they're describing the impact of the pandemic as a K-shaped, it's going to be this K-shaped recovery where the bottom half of the K continues to really struggle. What have you learned about your role as a legislator to help the folks that need it the most? Because I know personally, right? I mean, it was really upsetting to think about just how vulnerable too many people in our communities are. Your Senate district is very much a microcosm of California in many ways, and I'm sure that you've learned a lot about that. So do you have any thoughts about what you've learned about what the state can and should be doing to support?
Well, I would say this, that look, in some of these areas, we've made a lot of progress. I mean, we passed a $15 minimum wage 4 years ago to raise it, and it's been raised every year to get to that $15. We have invested along with the federal government in the Affordable Care Act, where the uninsured in California now is less than 7%. Okay. And that's adding over 4 million people in California to the health insurance rolls in the last 10 years. So is it enough? No. Our homeless population has grown. Poverty still exists in deep levels. We're trying to invest in childcare. We're trying to invest in pre-K. There are so many more things that we need to continue to do in this space. And so we have the resources now to help improve. The worry is it has to be sustainable resources, not one-time resources. And so a lot of what the governor is doing, to his credit, is focused on one time so that he's not locking down those monies as we see where our economy and our tax revenue is going. But I think that, look, and the challenge for the legislature, by the way, in an emergency like this, is that most of the actions are being driven by the executive. And that we have some oversight responsibilities, and we have the power of the budget. But Gavin has been leading this effort with his administration, and I think he's always acknowledged his desire to try to deal with the inequities before and during this pandemic, and he continues that in the leadership that he's advanced. It is not an easy thing to solve, but I think the awareness of it has grown higher than it's ever done, and hopefully that will be to all of our benefits.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And again, multi-layered. Everything it's really complex to solve these big problems. So we had a question that came in actually from the CEO of the Danville Chamber, former staffer of yours, Judy Lloyd. She had a question around the appetite in the legislature to consider is on the issue of independent contractors and employees, right? With the passage of Prop 22, and there's been some cleanup language around AB 5. She was curious if you thought that there was any appetite in the legislature around more flexibility rather than less for independent consultants.
Well, it's nice to hear from Judy. Hopefully she's well. And Tim, hopefully you're well as well. I wish I could see you in person. I don't know. I don't think there's a big appetite. These have been big battles over the last couple of years.
Yep.
So there is a fatigue factor that comes into play. And there still are sporadic places of acute problems. Trucking is an example, the trucking industry, people who own their own trucks. So there are places where we really haven't cleaned up those problems that have been caused. And I don't have the whole breadth of all legislation that's in this year. I know what's in the Senate, and there isn't a lot touching this space. And I don't know what might come over from the Assembly. I don't feel a big appetite for any kind of a major change. I think there's some fatigue from those fights that we've had over the last few years.
We also got a question for our former board chair, Patty Deutsch, was wanting to talk about the issue of the exodus from California, right? There's been a lot of that during, so depending on what you're reading or who you listen to, study out about losing a lot of lower and middle income Californians who just are priced out. there's also some high profile businesses that have relocated. I know locally, I was excited to read the story about that, you know, there have actually been more restaurants that have opened in Walnut Creek than have closed, kind of a good news story around that point. But do you see you know, we are losing a congressional seat because our rate of increase of population has slowed. Do you see the legislature doing anything to address concerns around any kind of California exodus?
Well, first, Patty, thank you for your question. Thank you for your leadership in the East Bay Leadership Council. You know, it's always an interesting story, people leaving, people coming. And there's been some polling and there's been some data that kind of digs a little bit deeper into what's really happening there. I don't see it rising to the level of any kind of major legislative response. You know, there's been a lot of folks that they're a sizable number of legislators that want to increase taxes on the wealthy, think that they're not paying their fair share and they're not leaving the state, and therefore there's more flexibility to raise revenue that way. And a lot of those bills aren't moving, but that's an example of a faction that thinks that, you know, that we're not doing enough for how we're taxing. And then we see the reports of folks who just can't afford to make it in California with our high cost of living. And so those restaurants may be opening, but they're having trouble hiring staff. Because a lot of the folks that would take those jobs are not taking those jobs. So you're seeing that maybe in customer service in some of our businesses. I know we've been trying to do a lot of takeout to support our restaurants, and sometimes it's been a little slower because of the number of people doing it, but the staff's ability to kind of be responsive. I don't know if anybody else is, maybe I'm going to the wrong restaurants. No, but they're very good restaurants. And we need to do that. But so I think we're seeing some impacts, Kristin, but I don't know if it's going to rise, or Patty, to the level that you're going to see a legislative response to that issue. As Kristin, as you just mentioned, you know, California is losing a congressional seat, but it's not that we don't have growth. It's just not growing as fast as some of the other states. So I don't see a reaction necessarily to the actions that we are talking about now at the legislative level yet.
Well, I know you have a hard stop at 12, so now we're going to enter kind of the lightning round. All right, vaccine passports. What do you think?
I think on the private sector side, I like them. I think that's for people who've done the right thing and protected themselves and their communities, that they should get those access points. If the private sector wants to implement them, I have no problems with it.
Great. Thank you for that. Wanted to also just acknowledge there's a question in the chat. I don't know if this is lightning round worthy. It's now a 2-year bill, right? But Assembly Bill 1218, which we've opposed because we're, while the East Bay Leadership Council supports the idea of the goal of electrifying the fleet, we've got some concerns about how that bill's written, right? That's the bill to implement the governor's executive order to ban internal combustion engine sales after 2035. And obviously we're in a very industrial county, the economy, you know, we want to make sure that our experts in energy are included in some of the solutions, but so we want to work on what would be a better alternative. But do you have thoughts on AB 1218?
Well, I don't have thoughts on that specific bill, but we are in transition with our energy community, but I don't think you do it prematurely. You're not getting people out of their cars. And I don't think importing oil from the Middle East and all the environmental impacts and the rest is the answer. So we are in transition, and we have to find a way to do it in a thoughtful way, respecting all the wonderful people who are working in those sectors, many of them here in Contra Costa County. And so I'm not into the quick solutions just because I want to make a political statement kind of thing that happens out there. I think we need a thoughtful engagement, and we all recognize we are in transition, but it's not going to happen overnight. So sometimes it's good in our state to set goals so that it kind of pushes people and it pushes the conversation. So I respect that, but I do think it has to be done carefully. And it's not going to be a night and day thing. We all recognize the existential threat of climate change. And I think we're all committed to trying to do something about it. We know it can't be done by California alone. So we have to be good partners. We can push the envelope and advance the conversation, and I'm all for that. But I don't think we take a hatchet to this issue. We have to take a scalpel and do it carefully and thoughtfully.
Well, we'd love to be your partners in that. And I think that And I talk about this a lot, that California is on some level on a collision course with some of our regulatory schemes. And I think we have to dig in and do some work on that. So would welcome that. Now, with just 2 minutes left, I'm not giving you a lightning round question, more of a closing question. If you were all powerful and could implement any change in the state legislature, what would it be?
Well, I think the foundation for all that we do is education, and making sure our kids get the best opportunity. And it's a point of frustration. You know, we have 800 schools in California that are considered failing schools. And I just so much want to have every child give that the best opportunity that they can have in their life. So if I had the magic wand, it would be to help improve our educational system so that we give everyone the best potential, wherever they are, from wherever they are. It's so foundational to our economy, and it's foundational to our democracy. You know, we know the more educated people that are in our communities, the stronger our democracy becomes. And I thought some of the most interesting factoids about this last election is based on education level, how people felt about their world and how they feel about elections. And there's just so much that's connected to education. So Kristin, that would be my big magic wand, would be to have greater improvements in our education system. Thank you for making me think deeply. Well, I'm so pragmatic about all the things that are going on in my world and the bills, and you moved me out of that space. Thank you.
Well, it's an important moment 6 years in. So I'm glad you're still at this. To anyone who didn't get their question answered, we'll have to do this again. Thank you for understanding. Just wanted to thank again Marathon, our sponsor for today. Thank you, Senator Glazer. And as an elected school board member, I appreciate your focus on education and couldn't agree with you more. So just continued success, and please know that, you know, I definitely welcome continued partnership with you, and thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Kristin. And let me say, part of my job, half of my job is listening, not talking. I had a chance to do a lot of talking, and I'm over talked. But a part of me doing my best work is to hear from you and your folks that are on this call and others. We got a lot of bills, you know, over 1,000 bills. I have to cast 200 or 300 votes in the next couple of weeks. So please give me your input, give me your feedback. I wish this was more two-way, because I'm tired of hearing myself talk. But we have a lot of tough issues, and I'm always looking for balance and thoughtfulness. And the experience that you have, and many of you have, in your world, in your professional life, in your business, in your classrooms, all those things really make us make better choices on your behalf. So thank you for the conversation. Look forward to doing it again soon.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Okay. And with that, we're adjourned. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe. Get vaccinated if you haven't done so already.